Hello guys, welcome to Security Red versus Blue Team channel. So in this video, we'll be discussing about CVSS scorings, which is Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So why do we need CVSS? CVSS is mainly required to assess the vulnerability, to rate the vulnerability, like whether it is a critical severity or high or medium or low severity. So if you look at the screen, the ratings will be usually from 0 to 10. So if the CVSS scoring is 0, then we treat it as none. If the CVSS score is between 0.1 to 3.9, we rate it as it's a low severity vulnerability. If it is between 4 to 6.9, we treat it as a medium. Between 7 to 8.9, we treat it as a high. And between 9 to 10, we treat the CVSS score as critical. So the vulnerability is high critical. So let's get started with what are the parameters that will be there as part of CVSS calculator. So in this video, we are mainly focusing on one of the important website that is called first.org, where we have other websites as well where we do use for as a calculator. But the first.org is the one where it has a high flexibility in terms of understanding and reading the values. So let's get started. So if you look at my screen, I have opened the first.org website. So then we just move on to the standards and publications. So inside standards, go to the common vulnerability scoring system. And then in the left side, we can see. So usually like there was CVSS 1, 2 and 3.x calculators in the before. In the past, now the latest the calculator that we will be using is CVSS 3.1 calculator. So when it comes to any vulnerability scoring system, so basically there are three metrics that are involved. So one is called base metrics, one is called the temporal metrics, and other third one is the environmental metrics or environmental score. So the base metric usually represents the intrinsic characteristics of a vulnerability, where that is constant over the time and across the user environments. So this is the mandatory part, the mandatory one when it comes to the scoring system. Whereas the temporal metrics and the environmental metrics, so these are mainly reflects the characteristics of a vulnerability, but these things gets changed over the time, and sometimes it gets changed over the user environment as well. So if we look at the temporal score, it will change over the time, but it may not change for the user environment. When it comes to environmental vector, it will change when it comes to particular user environment. So we'll just go with the base vector, which is the base scoring system. So in this one, we can see there are some 8 vectors that will be used to rate a vulnerability. So if you look at the first one, that is AV, we call it as attack vector. So attack vector is mainly describes the environment from which the attack can be launched. So it mainly the risk will be higher if the impact is via network. The risk will be lower when the attack is from the physical location or a local LAN or a local network. So that's how it goes. So in this case, let's say we take the example of let's say the facebook.com website. So in this website, let's assume that once you log in with your credentials, there is some vulnerability that you have found. So now in this case, the attack vector, we treat it as network, because the facebook.com domain is accessible everywhere, so it is accessible publicly. So that is why you call it as a network attack, because we don't need any physical access to the server of a Facebook to do this kind of an attack. Let's say we consider this. We take an example of the cross-site scripting. One example. So in this case, the cross-site scripting can be done with the help of network. We don't need a physical access for this. So that's how it is. So the attack vector, the score goes high when it is via network. The score will reduce when it is via physical, because not everyone will have the physical access to the network or a domain that we are going to attack. The second one comes the attack complexity. So attack complexity is like it describes like this is the condition where sometimes it needs attacker control. It's beyond the attacker control. So it is like one must aware of the configuration of the system sometimes to exploit the vulnerability. So it may not be that easy. So sometimes the complexity might go higher, depends on the complexity of the system as well. So the more the complex the attack is, the risk will be lower. So in this case, let's assume that once we access to the facebook.com website, so easily we can attack the network. We don't need much aware of the system background and all. So in this case we are just selecting low. So it depends on the situation and the vulnerability that is found. Then the third one comes the privileges required. So as we already said in the discussion in the example before, in the facebook.com we just log in with our credentials. So the privileges required mainly describes the attacker must have the login to the attack or not to do successful attack. So in this case we are seeing three options: low, none, high. So there are some websites where it requires admin privileges to perform particular actions. And if you take any website, there will be admin privileges, and there will we call it as a super user privileges, and there will be a low level user privileges that is used for the customer service. So in those cases, some vulnerabilities may not need admin privileges to perform the attack, but some vulnerabilities need admin privileges to perform the attack. So in those cases, we select the priority accordingly. So in this case, privileges required, let's say any Facebook user can do the attack in our case. So in this case we'll just select low. We don't need to go for high, because even there are some settings which might be there inside facebook.com website, which cannot be accessible for the users like us. It needs only the admin privileges, which we will not be having, only the except the domain owners. So in this case we select privileges required as low. When it comes to the overall score, if the privileges required is none, that the overall score will go very high. The reason, because without privileges, if it is possible, then anyone can do the attack. So in this case, if the privileges is low, the score will go high. If the privileges is high, then score will reduce. Then comes the user interaction. So the user interaction, it mainly determines if a vulnerability can be exploited solely by an actions of an attacker, or it needs a participation. So in this case, let's assume that there is no involvement of the owner required. Then we treat it as none. Or in case if the user interaction is required to perform the attack, then in that case it is R. So in case again, if there is no user interaction required, the score will go very high. If the user interaction required, then the score will little reduce. Then comes the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and the scope. So here, the scope mainly decides whether it will distinguish between the attack vector, which is exploitability metrics. We call it as attack vector, attack complexity, privileges required, and user interaction, and impact metrics that we call it as confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So it mainly distinguishes between the situation where vulnerable component and the impacted component are same or not. If both vulnerable and impacted component are same, then it means that there is no change in the scope. So it remains same, unchanged. So this will have a less score. In case if there is a change between the vulnerable and impacted component, which is beyond the component that is being vulnerable, so in that case the scope will become changed. If the scope gets changed, the score will be at peaks. Yeah, so in our case, let's assume that only we can retrieve the information or something with this cross-site scripting attack. So we won't be able to perform any big attacks, and there is no change in the scope. So we just keep it as unchanged. Then comes the impact metrics. So these are like the confidentiality, integrity, and availability metrics. So the confidentiality mainly refers to the disclosure of the information. In case let's say we are targeting one attack and not a particular link, and if there is no a leakage of sensitive information, then we treat it as none. In case if some information leakage is possible, then we treat it as low. In case if there is a high priority information that is being leaked, then we call it as confidentiality is very high. So based on the vulnerability and the penetration that we do, so based on the output that we get, so we decide what vector to be given, whether it is low, high, or none. So always there will be, if attack is possible, there is always a possibility of vulnerability information being disclosed. So either it could be low or it could be high. It depends on what information we are getting disclosed. So in our case, let's keep it as low. It's not very easy that in Facebook we get high level information. When it comes to integrity, so integrity it mainly refers to the trustworthiness of information or veracity of information. So whether one who is attacking the system, whether he is able to modify some settings or files or configurations or not. So if he is able to modify, if he is able to replace any of the existing content that is present, then we call it as low. The two, it depends on to what extent and or to what level he is able to modify the information. As let's say if he is a super user, in that case the privileges will be high, and if he is able to modify everything, then the integrity will become high. It is not that always all the super users will have all the privileges, all the information can be modified. Even the super users also have some limitation. So again, as we said, like it mainly the trustworthiness of the information that is being present. So if he is able to modify or change the any existing information, then we treat it as low. If he is able to modify any critical information, then we treat it as high. So this is called integrity. Similarly for availability also, we have three vectors: none, low, high. So availability, it mainly refers to the loss of availability of a service. Let's say you are accessing a facebook.com website and you did some attack, and now if some other user from some other device is trying to access to the system, let's assume that the site has become very low. So it is kind of an injection attack, the time based injection attack, where the same website which you are able to open within 5 seconds, you can through the attack that you have done, we can make almost 1 minute or 2 minutes delay for others to access it, or make the defacement of a website. So this is with respect to availability, whether we are able to make any change in the presentation of the website, that is apart from the normal functionality. So this divides the availability. So as we said, it's mainly the loss of availability of a impacted component or a website, or it could be any a network entity, it could be a database, or it could be email or web, or it could be anything. So it mainly it's that, like, attacks that consume the network bandwidth, process cycles, or disk space. It all impact the availability of impacted component. It need not be a website. Through the website we can bring down, through some code injection attacks, we could fill up some of the disk as well. So here again, let's say, as we said, like we have taken cross-site scripting again. So cross-site scripting attack. So here there is not much there is no much possibility of making the device go down, or make it unavailable. Again, it depends on what type of complex vectors we are using to attack the system. So in our case, we're just keeping as none, just assuming that there is no availability issues. And there is one more thing. One good thing is that, like, when we move the cursor towards the each of the icon, so it clearly says, in case if we don't know what vectors to select when we are assessing the vulnerability, we can just cross the cursor and we can get to know the description across each of the icons that is present here. So based on that, you can select the respective button to get the score. So the moment you select all the 8 vectors, you will see the base score is 4.6. So that is, it is showing as medium. So let's say, as we were saying, the attack vector, if the attack vector is network, the score is the 4.6. If it is physical, so it is coming low, because not everyone will have the physical access. So similarly, attack complexity low means the rate will be high. If the attack complexity is high, then not it's like not everyone can perform the attack, so the score is reduced. Similarly, when the privileges are not required, the score will go high. When the privileges are too high, then score will reduce. So in our case, we kept it as medium. So similarly, user interaction required or not required. If there is no user interaction required, then it is very easy for attacker to perform the vulnerability. Then in that case also score goes high. Similarly, the scope changed or unchanged. If the scope is changed, then it's a bigger problem. Then we can see there is a change in the score. If there is no not change, then it will come back to the previous one. Similarly, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Yeah, if there is no loss of information, then we keep it as none. Then the score will be low. If there is a high loss of confidentiality information, then the score goes high. Similarly, let's come to integrity. If the attacker is able to modify something, then if he's not able to modify any of the information, just is able to just view the information, confidentiality information, then in that case the integrity will be none. If he is able to still modify most of the critical one information, then we treat it as high. So in this case, we see the confidentiality is also high and integrity is also high. And in this, in availability, it applies the same logic. Yeah, even though if he's able to retrieve all the information, if he's able to modify some of the critical configuration, still there is no impact in the availability, then we keep it as low, sorry, none. If it still is able to bring some changes in the website, let's say, as I was saying, one of the example, the website that takes 1 minute to load, if it is taking 10 minutes to load, still there is a defacement, so we call it as low. So in case if there is a high availability problem, if the website is not accessible at all, then in that case the availability will be high. So based on this, the scores will change. So you can see here, by default, the same vectors the same score will be reflected across all the metrics. So this is the base score. So let's say, like, if any organization or any other vendor who founds a vulnerability in any website like Facebook or WhatsApp, or at any device, or it can be any router, let's say if you are using a home router for Airtel or something, any other network. In case if you have the access to the device, let's assume that you found some vulnerability. So simply what you can do it, if you can just do the research whether the vulnerability is already there in the market, is there any fix or something. If you don't find any information, just you can just take the vulnerability and just do your assessment through this website. Just let's say if you are a if you're doing, let's say, you bought one router from some vendor, and you have the physical router with you, and now you have the access to that. Now if you're able to perform some attack, then you must be selecting either local or physical, because you have the device with you. Not everyone can come to the network and attack your router. So in that case, select either physical or local, and then check whether the attack complexity is low or medium or high. So based on that, you select this one, and check whether the privileges required or not. Obviously there will be privileges for each of self configuration. Then select that one, and then check if any user interaction is required or not. Then check if the scope is getting changed or not. Then check what all information you can retrieve. Of course there won't be very high, because if a router is giving only your information alone, then it is fine. If it is giving some others information which is through available in the vendor website, then it is not a good sign. So in that case we select high. Similarly, integrity and availability, whether we can make any defacement, so that we need to think over it, and depends on the vulnerability you are finding. So based on this, we take the score, whatever the final score that comes, and then put these vectors. So you can copy this entire URL. If you see here, not only in this one, if you go to any scan reports, so I'm just showing one sample report of NASES. So you can see here, by default, the NASES will provide a CVSS 2.0 base score and CVSS 3.0 base score. So in this base score, you would have seen the short forms, that is like attack vector, that is AV. So that's what you have been seeing here, that AV attack vector, and AC attack complexity, and privileges required, that is low, and user interaction, that is R. So those vectors will be seeing here. So N for network, attack complexity is nothing but low. You can see here, a low or high. Similarly, at a privileges required is none. So it is saying that there is no privileges required. Then user interaction also none. Then scope is unchanged. Confidentiality is high. Integrity is high. Availability high. So just and the score is 9.8. So let's try to put these values here, whether we are getting 9.8 or not. So it is saying, the confidentiality high, integrity high, availability high, and scope unchanged. So okay, this is fine. And attack vector is none. Sorry, network attack complexity is low. Privileges required is none. User interaction is none. Yeah, so we see the score is 9.8, so which is critical. The critical score is between 9 to 10. So it marked as a critical vulnerability. So we take this score, we take this attack vectors, we send it to them. So this is the base score that will never get changed. Then once we send it to them, and also we can include the temporal score. So the temporal score, it's like the metrics that can describes that change over the time, and influence the risk of the vulnerability, mainly based on the three parameters, which is three vectors, that is the exploitability, code maturity, and remediation level, and report confidence. So we don't have to worry about much on these parameters, unless we have full proof of concept for other stuff. So mainly we need to focus on the base metrics that we when we are submitting any new vulnerability to the system, to any the owner of the website or a product or vendor. And then similarly we have environmental score. So this will get changed based on the system, for a particular environment. Here again we have like Security requirement metrics. Again, when it comes to security requirement, we have these three CIA metrics, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability requirement metrics. And then we have the modified base metrics. So usually these things will be changed by the product owners or the device owners who is doing their final assessment, because the initial assessment will be the base score that will be given by the reporter. Then the product owners will perform their final assessment, whether is there any system dependencies for a particular system. So based on that, they will be changing the score. Let's say by default it is given as not defined, and the base score will be applied to the temporal and environmental score as well. In case if there is any change, the present year, if the product owner thinks that okay, there is not much confidentiality problem and it is low, then they'll change the modified confidentiality as low, and they'll keep the modified integrity also low. I mean, it depends on the how the environment is, and let's assume that availability is also low. So in that case, the score will become 7.3. Of course, even though our base score and the temporal score will not change, but the environmental score. So this they will treat it as the final score. Yeah. So this is how the vulnerability rating will work. So if anybody wants to assess the vulnerability in their network there, which they have found, and if you are looking for any the best one of the best website, any best websites in the internet, then you can blindly go for this tool, which is the first.org. So here you can go for a CVSS calculator. So again, like where we can find it is like, under standards and organization, go to the common vulnerability scoring system. Then you will find the calculator here, and go for the always latest calculator, which is CVS 3.X calculator. Yeah. So thank you guys, thanks for watching the videos, and do let us know if any queries on this video. Thank you.